So I started sailing and racing Hobie Cats all through high school, and I ended up writing some books on it. But then it came time to actually live on a boat at the time. And catamarans back then, big catamarans were not popular. There were very few people that built them and what have you. So I ended up buying a Pearson Allbird 35. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that boat. It was a big, heavy, full-keeled monohull. And I lived on that boat through my undergraduate years. But I remember buying that boat. And I went and I met a yacht broker. And back then, yacht brokering was very different than it is now. They had a multi-list, and you couldn't instantly send pictures and what have you. And you couldn't just really just drive all over the world to learn about a boat and understand it. And so I told this broker, I said, look, you know, I'm trusting you to really help me out here. And you know, he was great, and he finally got me into this boat. But I remember him saying something to me then, which has stuck with me. He says, Phil, his favorite thing was to say was blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. He was a pretty funny guy. But he said, you know, Phil, all the manufacturers always say the same things when they're trying to sell a boat. Loads of room and comfort for mom and the kids, plenty of performance and quality for dad. And that hasn't changed, okay? Which doesn't mean that there aren't boats out there that can do both, but generally speaking, every boat, as you all know, is a compromise on some level. You have to decide where your budget is, and if you're prepared to accept a slower boat, to have more space down below, etc. And so the key thing when buying a catamaran, or really any boat, is to really sit down and think about, how am I going to use this boat? What do I need from this boat? What features, what performance, what characteristics do I need from this boat? I'd like to say that basically there's a few things that everybody needs to understand about catamarans when you're engaged in the buying process. I'm just going to run through some of these, and then we'll start talking about specific cruising agendas and the boats that I think are most appropriate for that particular agenda. First one is that it is generally the case that the more comfortable and spacious a boat is at anchor, the less comfortable and slower it will be underway. Okay? That doesn't mean that just because a boat is spacious and everything is going to be slow, but generally speaking, whenever you take a hull and you make it wider, you're asking the boat to push more water aside to get through the water. Okay? And if you make the boat lower to the water, particularly a catamaran, you're going to increase hydrodynamic resistance and potentially slamming and pounding issues. So when you're thinking about getting a cat, it's important to ask yourselves, am I going to be traveling really long distances in the boat? And how important is it to me when I'm traveling that when I'm actually sailing, the boat's comfortable? The other thing that you need to think about is that wider hulls do in fact carry more payload. If you have a wider boat, you ultimately are going to limit its top-end speed. But when you put on Will Durant's History of Civilization and you have 14 kayaks and 10 surfboards and dive compressors and tanks and 50,000 BTUs of aircon, whatever in the heck, if you're so inclined to load that kind of stuff on the boat, then you're going to need wider hulls. You either have to go longer and leaner to carry X amount of payload, or you have to go shorter and fatter. Okay? So when you're buying a boat, one of the key questions that I ask people when I'm talking to them is, tell me a little bit about how many people are going to be on the boat most of the time, and what sort of stuff are you going to be carrying around on the boat? What sort of goodies and toys do you want on the boat? And the other issue is tenders. When you go world voyaging, your tender is your taxi. Okay? So you want a really good tender on your boat. You want to have a tender. I like a console tender where I can sit down and steer. Okay? I don't care if it's got a 15 horsepower engine or a 50 horsepower engine. I don't like sitting down and steering and being soaking wet when I want to go in and have dinner with my wife at some restaurant or what have you. So you need a boat that can handle payload aft for your tender and all that sort of stuff. So I take a lot of notes about that because I need to get a sense of, okay, how much weight are they going to carry? And then if that person is oriented towards performance, then I immediately know that we're probably going to need to get them a slightly longer and leaner boat so they can get the kind of speeds they want and still carry that payload. if they're not oriented towards performance, then they can get short, you know. What happens when I'm consulting with a client usually is they send kind of a wish list of the things that they want, and it usually comes down to a basket of features, a certain budget price point, and a general idea of what that cruising agenda is. And generally, after I kind of know what all that criteria is, I can start to say, well, this typo might work for you, that typo might work for you. Because I don't know all of your budgets and all of your agendas, it's be very hard for me to say, okay, well, you know, you need a 1994 X or whatever, because each of these catamarans out here, Lagoon changes their line almost every 4 years, Katana every 6 years, Fountain Peugeot every 4 or 5 years. So there's 2-3 generations back. So depending upon where a person's budget and price point is, there's different boats that actually make, you know, a good